What happens when an oil palm plantation is poorly managed? Imagine planting hundreds of oil palm trees. You spend money clearing the land, you buy seedlings, you pay workers, you apply fertilizer. You wait 3, 4, 5 years for the plantation to mature. Then the trees finally start producing. But instead of getting the harvest you expected, something is wrong. The bunches are smaller, some palms are producing poorly, weeds are taking over parts of the plantation. Fertilizer costs keep rising, but production doesn't seem to improve. Harvesting becomes irregular. Fruit is left on the ground. Some ripe bunches remain on the trees for too long. And after years of investment, the plantation is making far less money than it should. This is one of the biggest realities of oil palm farming. Planting oil palm is not the same thing as managing an oil palm plantation. A plantation can be established correctly and still become unproductive because of poor management. And the frightening part is that many management mistakes don't destroy the plantation overnight. They quietly reduce productivity year after year. By the time the farmer realizes how much money is being lost, the damage may already be expensive to reverse. So in this video, we're going to look at exactly what happens when an oil palm plantation is poorly managed. We'll examine weeds, fertilizer, pruning, harvesting, pests, drainage, labor, roads, record keeping, and something many farmers overlook: the difference between owning many palm trees and actually managing a productive plantation. Because a plantation doesn't make money simply because palm trees are standing on the land. The money comes from managing those trees well enough to consistently produce and recover valuable fruit. 1. The first problem: the plantation starts losing its productive potential. The first thing to understand is that poor management doesn't always mean the trees immediately die. That's actually what makes it dangerous. A poorly managed plantation may still look green. The palms may still be standing. The plantation may still look impressive from a distance. But underneath that appearance, productivity can be declining. Research on smallholder oil palm has found substantial yield gaps between actual and attainable production, with agronomic factors such as nutrient management, harvest interval, weed control, and pruning contributing to those gaps. In simple terms, two plantations can have oil palms of similar age. They can be planted in similar environments. They can even use similar planting densities. Yet one plantation can produce significantly more because it is managed better. That means the farmer's job doesn't end when the seedling is planted. In many ways, that's when the real work begins. 2. Weeds can turn into a hidden competitor. One of the easiest problems to underestimate is weeds. A farmer may look at weeds and think, they're just plants growing between my palms. But that's not the whole story. Weeds compete with the oil palms for resources. They can interfere with access to the palms. They can make fertilizer application less efficient. They can make harvesting more difficult. And in young plantations where palms have not yet developed a large canopy, vegetation management can be especially important. Oil palm management guidance emphasizes controlling weeds around young palms, because excessive weed growth can interfere with establishment and development. But here's where another mistake happens. Some farmers respond by trying to eliminate every plant in the plantation. That's not necessarily good management either. The goal isn't simply destroy everything that isn't an oil palm. The goal is controlled vegetation management. Ground cover, soil protection, erosion control, and biodiversity can matter. The farmer needs to distinguish between problematic weeds and useful vegetation. This is why professional plantation management is not simply about working harder. It's about knowing what needs to be controlled, where, when, and why. And there is another economic issue. Weed control costs money, labor costs money, herbicides cost money, equipment costs money, repeated operations cost money. So poor weed management creates a double problem. You can lose productivity while simultaneously increasing the cost of recovering that productivity. 3. Then comes the fertilizer problem. Another major failure is fertilizer management. This is where some farmers make one of two opposite mistakes. They either apply too little or they apply fertilizer without properly understanding what the palms actually need. Neither is good management. Oil palms remove substantial nutrients from the field as they grow and produce bunches. The crop therefore requires proper nutrient management. FAO guidance notes that young oil palms have significant nutrient requirements for growth, while mature producing palms have particularly important potassium requirements associated with fruit production. But fertilizer management isn't simply buy fertilizer and spread it. The correct program depends on factors such as palm age, soil characteristics, nutrient status, yield potential, rainfall, and other local conditions. If a farmer repeatedly under-fertilizes a plantation, the palms may fail to achieve their productive potential, and the farmer may not immediately recognize the problem. There may still be green leaves, there may still be bunches, there may still be fruit, but production may be lower than it could have been. Now consider the opposite problem. Over-application. A farmer may believe, if some fertilizer is good, more fertilizer must be better. That's bad logic. Plants have nutritional requirements, not unlimited appetites. Applying nutrients without a sound basis can waste money and may create environmental problems. The objective isn't to spend the most money on fertilizer. The objective is to achieve an economically sensible nutrient balance that supports healthy growth and production. And this is why plantation records matter. If you don't know what you applied, when you applied it, where you applied it, and how the palms responded afterward, you're not really managing the fertilizer program. You're guessing. 4. Poor pruning can create harvesting and productivity problems. Now let's talk about something that looks simple. Pruning. Pruning is often treated as cleaning, but it isn't simply about making the plantation look neat. Leaves are part of the palm's productive system, so excessive removal can be harmful. At the same time, neglected dead or problematic fronds can interfere with plantation operations and harvesting. This means pruning requires judgment. The farmer needs to maintain an appropriate frond balance rather than simply cutting leaves because the plantation looks messy. Poor pruning can therefore become another example of how a seemingly small management decision can affect the economics of the plantation. Too much intervention can be damaging. Too little can create operational problems. Good management sits somewhere between the two. 5. The harvesting system can destroy value. Now we get to one of the most important parts of the entire business, harvesting, because producing fruit is only half the job. You also have to recover that fruit efficiently. Imagine a palm produces a valuable bunch. The bunch becomes ready for harvest, but the harvesting team doesn't come. Days pass, the bunch becomes overripe. Fruit begins falling. Some fruit lands on the ground. Then the workers eventually arrive. They cut the bunch, but they don't collect all the loose fruit. Some remains underneath the palm. That is money left in the field. Research from the Malaysian Palm Oil Board highlights losses from harvested bunches losing weight over time, loose fruits not being fully collected, and oil quality deteriorating as harvesting efficiency declines. This is important because farmers sometimes focus only on the bunches, but loose fruits matter too. A plantation can therefore have a surprising amount of hidden loss simply because harvesting isn't organized properly. 6. Harvesting too early is also a problem. Here's another mistake. Some farmers think, the earlier I harvest, the better. Not necessarily. If bunches are harvested before reaching the appropriate maturity, the fruit may contain less recoverable oil than properly matured fruit. MPOB research and guidance emphasize the importance of appropriate ripeness, with unripe and overripe bunches, both creating problems for efficient processing and value recovery. So harvesting is not simply cut the bunch whenever you see one. It is about recognizing the appropriate maturity stage. That requires training, it requires supervision, and it requires a harvesting schedule. 7. Harvesting too late creates another loss. Now go to the other extreme. Suppose the plantation is visited irregularly. A bunch becomes ripe. Nobody harvests it. It stays on the palm. Eventually, more fruits detach. Now the plantation worker has to recover the bunch and collect loose fruit. Some of that fruit may be difficult to find. Some may become damaged. And the longer the harvested crop waits before processing, the greater the quality concern. MPOB research has documented deterioration in oil quality with delayed handling, including substantial increases in free fatty acids under prolonged delay. This means harvesting management affects more than quantity. It can affect quality and the value received for the crop. And that leads to a critical principle. A plantation doesn't only need to produce fruit, it needs a system for getting the fruit from the palm to the mill efficiently. 8. Poor harvesting intervals create an unstable system. A professional plantation doesn't simply harvest whenever workers feel like coming. There is a harvesting round. The plantation is divided into manageable blocks. Workers move through those blocks according to a schedule. The goal is to catch bunches at appropriate maturity while minimizing losses. MPOB materials describe regular harvesting rounds as an important part of efficient harvesting management. If the harvesting interval becomes too long, ripe and overripe bunches can accumulate. If it is poorly coordinated, some blocks may receive attention while others are neglected, and this can create an uneven production pattern. The farmer then looks at the total monthly harvest and wonders, why is my production so inconsistent? The answer may not be the weather, it may be the harvesting system. 9. Poor collection of loose fruits is literally leaving money on the ground. This deserves its own section because it's such a simple concept. If the fruit contains oil and you leave the fruit on the ground, you have lost potential revenue. MPOB publications specifically identify uncollected loose fruits as a source of oil recovery loss. Think about what happens over an entire plantation. One fruit doesn't look important. 10 fruits don't look important. A few hundred fruits may still look insignificant. But multiply those small losses across thousands of palms and many harvesting rounds. Now you have a serious economic problem. This is why plantation profitability is often determined by hundreds of small operational decisions. 10. Pests and diseases can turn a management problem into a production problem. Then there are pests and diseases. A farmer cannot simply plant the palms and assume they will take care of themselves. Problems need to be detected early, because early detection gives the farmer more options. If unusual leaf damage appears, if certain palms repeatedly perform poorly, if bunch development looks abnormal, if mortality starts increasing, those signs should trigger investigation. The mistake is waiting until the problem becomes obvious across a large part of the plantation. At that point, the cost of intervention can be much higher. And this is where plantation inspection becomes important. You need someone actually walking through the plantation, not just driving past the entrance, not just looking at photographs, not just assuming everything is fine because the palms are green. 11. Drainage problems can quietly damage the business. Now consider water. Oil palm requires water, but that does not mean every oil palm plantation should remain waterlogged. Poor drainage can create difficult soil conditions and operational problems. Waterlogged sections may become difficult for workers and equipment to access. Roots can also be affected by poor soil aeration. And if certain areas repeatedly remain saturated, the plantation can develop uneven performance. This creates another management challenge. A plantation isn't always one uniform piece of land. One section may be productive, another may be poorly drained, another may have erosion, another may have weed pressure, another may have poor access. Treating the entire plantation as if every hectare has exactly the same problem is lazy management. Good managers identify differences between blocks and respond accordingly. 12. Bad roads can reduce the value of a good harvest. Here's a problem many new farmers don't think about when establishing a plantation. Access. Imagine you successfully produce a large quantity of fresh fruit bunches, but the internal roads are poor. Rain comes. The road becomes muddy. Vehicles struggle to enter. Workers have difficulty moving bunches. Transport becomes slower and more expensive. And now the farmer has a harvest sitting in the field while logistics become the bottleneck. Remember, fresh fruit bunches are not a product you can treat like dried grain sitting safely in a warehouse. They need to move through the harvesting and processing chain efficiently. That means roads, collection points, transport arrangements, and mill access are part of plantation management. A farmer who thinks only about planting has not thought about the whole business. 13. Poor labor management can destroy good agronomy. You can have the right fertilizer. You can have good seedlings. You can have productive soil. You can have good rainfall. And still lose money because the workers aren't properly managed. Why? Because oil palm requires repeated field operations. Weeding, pruning, fertilizer application, pest monitoring, harvesting, loose fruit collection, transport, maintenance. If workers don't know what standard is expected, the quality of work becomes inconsistent. If workers are paid only to complete tasks quickly, they may prioritize speed over quality. If harvesting teams are not supervised, ripe bunches can be missed. If fertilizer is poorly distributed, some palms may receive too much, while others receive too little. And if there is no accountability, the farmer may not even know where the problem is. This is why plantation management is partly an agricultural problem, but also a management problem. 14. The biggest mistake, managing by assumption. This may be the most important lesson in the entire video. Many farmers manage their plantation based on assumptions. I think the palms are doing fine. I think we applied enough fertilizer. I think the workers harvested everything. I think the weeds aren't a serious problem. I think production will increase next year. I think that section is producing less because of the weather. Maybe, but maybe not. Without records, you're guessing? A serious plantation should track things such as how many palms are planted, how many are productive, how many are missing or dead, which blocks are performing well, which blocks are performing poorly, how much fertilizer was applied, when was it applied, how much fruit was harvested, how often was each block harvested, how much fruit was rejected or lost, how much loose fruit was recovered, how much did harvesting and transport cost, and what was the revenue. You don't need a billion-dollar plantation management system to start recording these things. Even a properly maintained spreadsheet can reveal problems that are invisible when you simply walk through the farm. 15. Poor management can make a large plantation less profitable than a small one. This is where the economics become interesting. Suppose farmer A has a smaller plantation. The palms are well maintained, weeds are controlled, fertilizer is properly managed, harvesting is regular, loose fruits are collected. The crop moves efficiently to the mill. Farmer B has a plantation several times larger, but the plantation is neglected. Weeds are uncontrolled. Harvesting is irregular. Fertilizer application is inconsistent. Some areas are inaccessible. Loose fruits are left behind. Which farmer has the better business? The answer isn't automatically farmer B. More land doesn't automatically mean more profit. More palms don't automatically mean more cash. The real question is, how much valuable output does each productive hectare generate after management and operating costs? That is a much better way to think about plantation economics. 16. Poor management can make expansion a terrible decision. This is another mistake I would strongly warn against. A farmer has 10 acres. The plantation is already difficult to manage. Then the farmer thinks, I need 30 more acres. Why? Because bigger sounds better. But if you cannot properly manage 10 acres, adding another 30 acres doesn't solve the management problem. It multiplies it. FAO guidance has made a similar point in practical terms. It can be better to manage a smaller plantation properly than to cultivate an area so large that the work is badly done. This is one of the most important principles for anyone considering oil palm. Scale should follow management capacity, not the other way around. 17. The cost of neglect compounds over time. Now imagine a plantation that is poorly managed for 1 year. Maybe the yield falls slightly. The farmer thinks, next year will be better. Then another year passes. The weeds become harder to control. Some palms remain underperforming. Fertilizer use becomes inconsistent. Harvesting losses continue. The road deteriorates. Workers become frustrated. And the farmer keeps spending money without understanding why the returns are disappointing. This is the dangerous part. Poor management can become cumulative. You're not simply losing this year's harvest. You're potentially carrying problems into future production cycles. And when the plantation is a long-term agricultural asset, that matters enormously. 18. A poorly managed plantation can look profitable on paper. Here's another trap. Suppose a farmer says, "I harvested 100 tons of fruit this year." That sounds impressive. But what did it cost to produce those 100 tons? How much was spent on fertilizer, labor, weed control, harvesting, transport, road maintenance, pest management, equipment, management? And what was the actual selling price? Revenue is not profit. This distinction is critical. A plantation can have impressive production numbers while producing disappointing returns because operating costs are too high. That is why serious farmers should track revenue per hectare, cost per hectare, yield per hectare, and ideally, profit per hectare. Those numbers tell you much more than simply saying, "I have 5,000 palms." 19. What does good management actually look like? So if poor management creates all these problems, what does good management look like? It starts with observation. You inspect the plantation regularly. You know what is happening in each block. You identify problems early. Then comes planning. You don't wait until fertilizer is urgently needed before thinking about fertilizer. You don't wait until harvesting becomes chaotic before organizing labor. You don't wait until roads become impassable before thinking about access. You don't wait until weeds completely dominate an area before controlling them. Good management is proactive. Then comes execution. The plan must actually be carried out. A perfect management plan that never reaches the field is worthless. Then comes measurement. You compare what you expected with what actually happened. And finally, correction. If one block underperforms, investigate it. If harvesting losses increase, find out why. If fertilizer costs rise without corresponding improvement, review the program. If labor productivity falls, investigate the cause. That's management, not simply owning land. 20. The 5 systems. Every serious oil palm farmer should think about. If you want to simplify everything we've discussed, think about 5 systems. System 1. The tree. Are the palms healthy? Are they growing properly? Are they producing? Are there missing or dead palms? Are pests or diseases present? System 2. The soil. Is fertility being maintained? Are nutrients being replaced appropriately? Is erosion controlled? Is drainage adequate? System 3. The field. Are weeds managed? Are access paths usable? Are pruning and field sanitation handled properly? Can workers reach every palm? System 4. The harvest. Are bunches harvested at appropriate maturity? Is the harvesting interval controlled? Are loose fruits collected? Is fruit transported efficiently? System 5. The business. What does the plantation produce? What does it cost? Which blocks are profitable? Where are the losses? And what needs to change? If one of these systems fails badly, the entire plantation can suffer. 21. The real lesson: management can be more important than size. There is a dangerous mindset in agriculture that says, "Once I have enough land, I'll make money." That's incomplete. Land gives you capacity. Trees give you biological production potential. But management converts that potential into actual output. You can own hundreds or thousands of palms and still have a weak agricultural business. And you can have a smaller plantation that is significantly more productive per hectare because it is managed properly. That's why the question shouldn't only be, "How many palms do I own?" Ask, "How productive are my palms? How much fruit am I recovering? How much am I spending? How much am I losing? How much profit does each hectare generate?" Those questions force you to think like a plantation operator rather than simply a landowner. 22. Before you expand, fix the system. If you already own an oil palm plantation and production isn't meeting expectations, don't immediately assume the solution is more land. First, diagnose the existing plantation. Walk through the blocks, check the palms, look at weed pressure, review fertilizer practices, review harvesting intervals. Check loose fruit recovery. Look at pest and disease records. Inspect drainage. Inspect roads. Review labor. Review production records. Then identify the biggest bottleneck. Because if you don't know why your current plantation is underperforming, expanding it simply means you're going to reproduce the same problems on a larger scale. That is not growth. That's scaling inefficiency. Conclusion. Oil palm farming is often presented as a simple equation. Plant trees, wait, harvest fruit, make money, but the real business is much more complicated. Between planting and profit are years of management decisions. Weed control, nutrient management, pruning, pest monitoring, drainage, harvesting, loose fruit collection, transport, labor, record keeping, and cost control. Ignore these things and the plantation may continue to stand while its economic performance quietly deteriorates. But manage them properly, and you give the plantation a much better chance of reaching its productive potential. The biggest lesson is this: a plantation is not valuable simply because there are many palm trees on the land. Its value comes from the productive system behind those trees. The farmer who understands this doesn't just count palms, they measure performance. They don't just look at the plantation, they study it. They don't simply hope for a bigger harvest. They identify what is preventing a bigger harvest. And most importantly, they understand that oil palm is a long-term business. A mistake made today can affect production years later. So before planting more acres, before buying more seedlings, and before assuming that bigger land means bigger wealth, ask yourself one question. Can I properly manage what I already have? Because a small, well-managed plantation can be a better business than a large plantation that is slowly being neglected. And if you understand that principle, you are already thinking differently from many people who enter agriculture simply because they believe farming is passive income. It isn't. Oil palm can become a powerful long-term agricultural asset, but only when the biology, operations, and economics are managed together. If you found this useful, subscribe to Agro Wealth Insights. Here we don't just talk about the dream of agricultural wealth. We break down what actually happens on the farm, the costs, the risks, the numbers, the mistakes, and the systems behind profitable agriculture. Because before you invest more money into agriculture, you should understand exactly where that money can be lost.